Welcome. In front of me is a Honor 90 Lite, and today I'll go over unboxing along with a quick overview of this device. So anyway, let's just get straight into this after the intro. Okay. So right off the bat, I'm going to point out one thing. This is supposedly a new device, but these kind of stickers right here don't seem very new, and there clearly was something being pulled off in the area where there was an HTC sticker. So we'll see how the device actually looks like. Now, probably from the packaging you can gather that there is no charger in the box. So a light is also referring to light in what you get in box, which is nothing almost. Anyway, here's our device. And the device looks fine. I don't see any kind of problems with it. Now let's turn that on. We do have our cable in here. So Type C to Type A, surprisingly, as you can see. And that's about it. Some eject tool. Yeah, that's it. So let's get into the phone itself. So right off the bat, the screen that you will see right here, once it actually boots up, is a 6.7-inch display, 1080p by 2388 pixels. It's a IPS LCD display running at 90 Hz refresh rate and boasting a 89.6% screen to body ratio with 390 pixels per inch. Now that being said, the bezels right here are just stupidly small, as you can possibly see. This is, if we don't count in the bottom, because the bottom has the not as good of a design, but just do it like this, yoink. This is what you would imagine as a bezel-less phone, basically. So yeah, you basically have a frame and almost, I don't know, maybe a millimeter or two away from the frame you already have the display itself. So that actually makes the device look super nice. But continuing on with the display, actually no, that's basically it for the display. So let's move over to the cameras. At the back we have a triple camera setup, or at least it looks like a triple camera setup. So the main sensor is a 100 megapixel wide sensor, then we got a 5 megapixel ultra wide, and then even worse, we have a 2 megapixel macro. Not sure why we have that shit macro here, considering we have a 100 megapixel wide sensor, which will capture a significantly better macro shot than the macro dedicated lens. I mean, it's literally 50 times more pixels. Why would you include this? Now I would normally show this off, so let's actually go to the setup. Now, while I'm going through the setup, I'm gonna also go through the specs internally. So internal specs, we have a 4500 mAh battery, 8 gigs of RAM, running on Dimensity 6020. And in terms of built-in storage, we are looking at 256 gigs of storage with, like I mentioned, 8 gigs of RAM. There is no upgradable storage, so 256 is the only option that you can get, and you have no option of having any more storage, even if you wanted to. Now that the device is set up, we can open up our camera, and you know what, let's capture this, because it has some fine detail into it if we get really close. So let's get straight into it. This will be a normal photo. So that will be using 100 megapixel sensor. It is going to bend it down, meaning it's going to combine like 4 pixels into one to get much better result. But I am going to do a 2 times zoom. It's 100 megapixel, I can afford it. Now let's see how close I can get. So it looks about this close, a little bit closer, and it starts to lose sharpness because I'm getting a little bit too close and personal. So that is a dedicated, or not dedicated, that is the main shooter, that 100 megapixel. Could you move over? I'm trying to figure out the crappy camera UI here. There we go. More. And super macro, there we go. So about this close, that's how close I can get to it. Now, we can look at the comparison. So this is the dedicated macro lens. I mean, for a macro, for a 2 megapixel macro, I will admit it's not bad. I've seen significantly worse. But this is the 100 megapixel sensor. Yeah, no actual comparison right here. Now it is a little bit darker and captures a little bit more like weird detail because this is technically kind of plastic. At this close-up, which you see these whiteness, this fuzz, is basically light reflecting off of the plastic surfaces. Something that you don't actually get to see all that much here. You do see it a little bit, but it's lacking in detail, so it just looks a little bit more uniform. From further away, one could say that this looks better, but it's a macro, so we care about close-ups, and let's be honest, this is significantly higher quality close-up. So like I mentioned, the 100 megapixel will do a better job than the dedicated macro lens, meaning that the macro is absolutely useless here. Great job on including redundant specs on the device. Fantastic. And all that so you can boast that you have triple camera setup. Fantastic marketing. Now, let's see what we get else. In terms of charging speeds, we are looking at 35 watt charging speed, and that's Europe. Global is 22.5. Okay then. Now Honor, or at least prior to that, I would have expected they would include a significantly faster charging speed on their devices. For goodness sake, they're Huawei devices. I know these are apparently different companies, but let's be honest, the UI is exactly the same still. So let's assume that these are basically the same devices, just scheming away around Ben. So Huawei tends to have pretty decent charging speeds, like way better than 22 or even 35 watts. So not sure what's happening here. Not sure why also they decided to go with two different ones, global 22 while Europe has 35. 35 will be decent, but only if you live in Europe, otherwise you get the short end of the stick, while probably still paying the same amount for the device. So something to keep your mind on. Now, continuing on, they are advertising, at least in Europe, that it's going to charge your device to 55% in 30 minutes. Wonder why they didn't advertise it globally. Probably because it's unremarkable. And moving on to the last part, it's going to be the price tag. And this device also, it's a little bit of a wonky price. It's about $200. Now, I'm not exactly even sure if this device is being sold in US, so it could be that it's not. After all, let's be honest, Honor used to be Huawei, and Huawei has been spanked so hard that they can no longer do business in US, at least as far as I remember. So one would expect that Honor would fall under the same branch, even though they claim to be separate from Huawei. But anyway, even though that being said, if we skip over all that, $200 is still not a small price. It does have pretty decent specs, but it's still lacking in certain areas. So the non-expandable storage is a little bit of an L right here on a device at $200. You would expect to have one. It's kind of like an entry to mid-range devices. So in that price range, I expect my phone to have expandable storage, and I don't care that it's Honor and probably they are using their nano memory that no one gives a single hoots about. That's one thing. Another thing is the battery size. This isn't a small device, yet it has only a 4,500 mAh battery. At this size, it should have 5,000. So that's another little bit of an L right here. that 2 megapixel macro is just a laughable inclusion in this camera specs right here. And I think one more or last thing that I will point out here is the build quality. We do have a plastic back, and it does feel a bit of a kind of cheap design right here. It's just literally like a plastic little cover right here with a plastic frame. The only redeeming quality of this device is the display right here being almost bezel-less. It looks pretty nice, and that's probably the only reason you might be looking at this device, because other than that, I don't really see much of a reason to go for Honor. It is a China phone, so if you're gonna go with China phone, you might as well go with something like a Poco F5, which, if I remember correctly, will basically cost as much as this. Let's see. So Poco F5 costs, no, actually, sorry, a little bit more, but actually decently more. So this costs about 200, Poco costs 360. But that being said, Poco will be significantly better device. So number one, it's going to be faster, and at very base model, it's going to outperform this one in every single scenario. So if you want a decent device that will last you a little bit longer, believe me, sometimes it's a little bit better to fork out more money and have your device last you longer and not have problems where it's just slowing down and feels sluggish. And in general, it's going to be much better, arguably much better experience using something like a Poco F5. Now, obviously, there are also cheaper devices that will be closer to this price range, but again, this price right here isn't necessarily anything appealing. It's what you would expect from a device with these kind of specs, if not even a little bit too much. I'm gonna check one last thing, which is how good is this processor compared to something like a Snapdragon, let's say 7. Okay, so putting it this way, Snapdragon 778G, which is not the newest processor from Snapdragon, is already still significantly faster than this. So that being said, Poco has an overclocked Snapdragon 7 Plus Gen 2, which is even faster than this, like probably double the performance, if not more. So obviously, if you want something that will go shoot through any tasks that you throw at it, open up any kind of app super quickly, and still not cost as much as, for instance, the Samsung devices do, then I highly recommend checking out Poco. They do have cheaper devices, which will be more in line with, for instance, the price of this. They will also be a little bit slower than what I'm referring to, but should be still faster than what you have right here. The only downside is you won't have this kind of nice bezel-less look as this device has. It is a little bit of a selling point, I will admit it. It looks pretty nice. If only they managed to also have the chin the same size, that would have been just fantastic. But with that rant being over, hopefully you found this video helpful. I try to go over the pros, cons of this device, and also give you better alternatives to this phone that will possibly cost less, while usually giving you a little bit more for your money. And if you found that helpful, don't forget to smash like, subscribe, and thanks for watching.